Actually.
Hello and welcome to A Gypsy's Kiss, the vlog. I'm Shelley Carney.
And I'm Toby Eunice. Stick with us a couple of seconds and we'll tell you about these two images behind me. And you're back.
And we're back. And you thought we weren't even going to be here today. But here we
aren't
are.
here today. So you're getting a recording. Shelley's in Rio Rancho and I'm in Boca Raton, but we didn't think we could leave you guys a week without at least doing something for you. So although this isn't live, we put up this recording so that you can have some Tuesday with Toby and Shelley.
And we're talking about this topic because
we had a couple of questions on under one of our videos, the last video we produced. People commented on the differences as they go through Once Upon a While. Yes, I do have my list.
okay.
As they go through Once Upon a While, they see some images that are familiar to them. They go back to the thrill of the chase and see that there's a difference between the two, other than the fact that this one, of course, is in color, and this one is not. This is from around page 104 in the thrill of the chase. This one is from page 137. In here, he's talking about his return to Santa Fe around 1972 and how he opened an art gallery and how he really didn't know a lot about painting. In this one, he talks about the evolution of his art opinion, and part of the metaphorical difference between this two is this is an evolved image. This one is black and white. This one is in color. So I thought we'd talk about them just a little bit and tell people what they see and why they see it. What's the matter?
I was just noticing that. So it's also in closer, right? Because this one's smaller.
It's
bigger.
That could That's the designer's decision to crop it just a little bit tighter.
Right.
But they did a lot of other things in the process to make it different. So let's go through them and talk about them a little bit. I'm still too loud on here, so I'll just take that down just a tad. So first of all, they're both Nikolai Fechin images, and as we all know, Nikolai Fechin was a favorite of Fenn's. He did a book on Nikolai Fechin's work, and he was the artist that Fenn purchased his estate after he passed away, and that's why, and he probably still has a lot of those materials if they haven't gone up for auction. This one is called The Player. Later on, Fechin was most widely recognized for his impressionistic work, his work during the Impressionist period. And later on, there is another picture that he painted of a woman called Mandolin Player that tends to me to look more impressionistic than this image right here. This one is called Portrait of Alejandra, which
Alejandra.
is Alejandra.
There's no R, right?
Oh, you're right. I keep saying the Alejandra as if it was Alexandra. I have seen it labeled Portrait of Alexandra. And I think that just kind of stuck in my head, but it's a Portrait of Alejandra. And I believe it's a Northern European name, Norwegian, Swedish, something like that. But again, they are Nicholas Fechin. The other big difference is although they're painted in his style, this one is a much narrower image than this one. You can see this has more of a golden mean kind of dimension to it, and that was one of the things that we noticed when we looked at the images. So the first thing, of course, that you'll see is that this image, because of its dimensions, because of its ratio dimensions, is much wider than this image. So they had to accommodate that in the photograph. You can see that in this case, the portrait ends before it reaches the frame, ends before it reaches Peggy, while this one pushes out into Peggy. And that gives us a clue as to how the person who did the artwork, the Photoshop work on this, it is very likely that what they did is they took this image, the digital version of this image, and they effectively cut Peggy and Forrest out of the image and put that in a separate file with a transparent background. Then they did all the work on what was left, including stretching the frame and then replacing this image with this one, and then they put back the layer, the transparent layer, with Peggy and Forrest. What they also had to do is they had to stretch the distance between them, because if you measure them, this distance between Forrest and Peggy is smaller than this distance, which means, but this right here is the same. So they had to move Peggy and the rest of this image over a little bit to accommodate this one, so she wasn't covering up too much of it. But that could be easily done with Photoshop cut, transparent background, etc., etc. Photoshop is very good at that. So that's the first thing that you notice, aside from the fact that one's black and white and the other's in color. The second thing that you'll notice, and for anybody who's doing any kind of photo analysis, one of the things that you look at first, kind of the first thing that you look at, that was redundant, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
So look at it twice, apparently. First and second.
Is how light falls, how the light falls on the image. So if you want to look at a person that's been carved out and the sunlight is coming from one direction on the person in the foreground and another direction on the house in the background, you know that that image has been photoshopped. So the first obvious one in this case is, although the lighting remains the same on the subjects, which tells me that they didn't make any changes to the lighting on the foreground, there is a difference in the background, and the most obvious one is the difference between the highlight that's left as a result of that art gallery light behind them. You can see this one is a very distinct highlight, and this one is missing the highlight, although the frame has the correct highlight on it. That pretty much is the same. This one missed the highlight. And so the designer could look at that and say, shucks, I forgot to add that highlighted area under the gallery light. And it could be very easily missed. Nobody's going to take a look at it, in the same detail probably that we have. Mm-hmm. But that was the first obvious one, that this was the original. This one is not. This one is the one that's been modified. That is, the Thrill of the Chase is the original, and the Once Upon a While has been modified. Mm-hmm. Then the second thing to look at is kind of in the resolution area, because right away you start seeing here the resolution where the painting meets the frame is about equal to the resolution in the rest of the image. While right here, you'll look at where the painting meets the frame, and the painting is a much finer resolution. When you blow it up, you can see the difference. This resolution is pretty much the same from top to bottom, even though what we're experiencing is some of the print process resolution here. But you can see this line is way much finer. The other thing that I noticed in this picture is that the image that they used, or the print process that they used, I'm going to suggest that it was the image. This image, the background and the foreground image that they used to paste this photo in, this image is a much finer resolution than the one in The Thrill of the Chase. It's the same image, but whatever processes they used, they made it. They were able to get much more resolution out of it. And the most obvious place is you can see this drop shadow that comes from the frame. It's there. It's the same drop shadow. There is that wasn't added. There is a place where they did add a drop shadow, but not there. It's just much finer and more resolved. It's easier to distinguish it from the background. But the big difference here is this line here versus this line here. Now Photoshop helps you there. Photoshop will ask you how you want it anti-aliased and how you want it to connect it. But it never never returns to the original. You'd have to do a heck of a lot of work in order to do that. And the fact you're dealing with black and white image versus black and white on black and white versus color on black and white creates a whole different set of problems for you. So then the second area that had to be considered, and how I figured out that Peggy had been moved but Forrest hadn't, was this area right here near Forrest's forehead. When you look at the images much tighter, you'll see a nice kind of simply resolved line in here. Here, the resolution had been covered with the equivalent of a drop shadow. Well, the drop shadow doesn't fall that way. That's one of those lighting indicators that I talked about earlier. There shouldn't be a shadow there. It's not there. It was added here. And also, this drop shadow is a little bit more refined, but I think, again, that goes back to the quality of the image resolution. This is the one that tells me Forrest was laid back on the image, anti-aliased, And then in order to soften that alias, they added a bit of a drop shadow behind him. But the drop shadow doesn't fit the lighting. So then the next, I just brought it into even more detail. And that is, you can see the normal resolution here of the original images, and it's kind of consistent in terms of resolution, not revolution. It's consistent from one side of the frame to the other. This one is inconsistent, and you can see that they had to accommodate that, laying him back over the picture by adding that drop shadow. The final area was Peggy's shoulder, and you can almost see it here. You can see that this is consistent resolution from here to here, while there's a much bigger difference between the resolution here and the resolution from the painting, which tells me the image that they used was the image that they used to place in here was a much higher resolution than the original image. I mean, you can see the details of the brush strokes, etc. And as you get closer, you can see, even more. This line here represents the resolution difference between this and this. There is none, so that's why it looks like it's consistent. This line here represents the resolution between this, and there is a significant difference. That's a much finer line. They didn't go through all the trouble, and when you get even closer, you can see how sharp that one is versus how blurry this one is. So they did a lot of work, and don't get me wrong, if you look at that line right there compared to that line right there, you can see the difference in resolution. So whoever did the work actually did a pretty good job. Like I said, what they had to do was cut Peggy and Forrest out, extend the frame, pull the frame out this way, separate Peggy from Forrest just a little bit further. You can see the distance between this image, this picture right here, and this picture right there. So it's just extended this way, but they had to move Peggy over just a tad along with this image down here. Right, so a lot of this part moved over, and there was a little indicator of all of that. Oh, you'll see a little white kind of
smudge.
Stretch. Yeah, it's a smudge stretch mark, because he was stretching the picture, and they had to accommodate that. But you can't see it in this image on here, but when you look in the book, you'll see a little white smudge that represents the stretching that they did. So, big question is why?
Because he wanted a color picture instead of a black and white picture.
Well, yeah, but why? Why?
Because he talks about color pictures in the ads.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It was the evolution. I mean, if anything represents an evolution in his art opinion, it's the difference between a black and white image and a color image, which gives you more data to work with, which gives an individual more data to work with. And he sold paintings, and he knew that there was a difference in profitability between an image that you put in a glossy that was black and white versus an image that was put in a glossy in color.
Mm-hmm.
So that was part of it. So part of it's we'll just sell more books in Fenn's theory of putting images in. So he was talking about his evolution of art opinion. I think the photographs represent in each case what he wanted to talk about. In this case, he's talking about the gallery and how he founded the gallery, and how he was pretty much an amateur at buying and selling art, but he learned along the way, and in the process, his opinion on the art evolved. But I think there's something else here, because he would have to deal with this in one way or the other. So this was in his gallery in 1972. He published The Thrill of the Chase in 2010. So that's 38 years difference between the time this photograph was actually recorded, and the time it was used in the book. Well, it is highly likely that between that time, 1972 or the 70s when this picture was taken, and 2010 when the book was, The Thrill of the Chase was published, that this painting was sold. It belongs to somebody else. Now, paintings are copyrighted, can be copyrighted in a funny way by the original owner, but a buyer has certain rights to it as well. They are not copyrights, but they are ownership rights. And one of the rights of ownership is that they become a material that has to be released.
He owns the painting.
So the painting, the point that I wanted to make is that in this case, one of three conditions existed. Either Fenn owned the painting, had purchased the painting and put it for sale in his gallery. Therefore, he could write his own materials release for it. Condition number 2 is he did not own the painting. He was selling it on behalf of someone else, and they gave him a materials release for it. Condition number 3 is he did not own the painting. He published it in the Thrill of the Chase, and then the owner called him and said, hey, you didn't own that painting at that time, I did. And at that point, they could either negotiate a materials release for money, or they could just do it because they were friends. But one way or the other, in order for this image to be published in this book, the owner would have had to have signed a materials release. The same is true for all of these, right?
Mm-hmm.
Either he owns that painting, or he got a materials release from the current owner of that painting to do that. And considering that the first Fechin painting that Fenn bought, he bought for $7,500. Was it $7,500?
Something like that.
Yeah, and then sold it 2 weeks later for $15,000, and then later on in his career saw it at auction for $180,000. And later on, I have seen Fechin paintings selling for as much as 11 to 15 million, which is a big number.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to guess that Fenn owns that painting. And it's part of his, what he'll leave behind to his, in his will to, what do they call it? Your estate. It'll be left in his estate. Is it a clue or a hint?
I don't see how it could be.
I don't know how it could be.
It's not in the poem.
I could, yeah, unless Fechin was specifically mentioned. He talks about Fechin. I don't think he holds him at the same level of esteem that he does, for example, Eric Sloane, but he loved him enough to write a book about him and to buy his estate, right? And to collect his paintings, I'm sure. So that should answer your questions. This is the original. This is the photoshopped version. Why? Because somebody had to sign a materials release for that stuff. And like I said, I think it is very likely that the signer of this materials release here is Forrest Fenn.
What about that? All right. So we'll be back next week, and we'll have our presentation followed by a live Q&A next time.
Yeah, I'll be back from...
But if you have any questions about today's topic, just put them in the comments below, and when Toby has some time, he'll take a look at them and answer your questions.
I will. So I will be playing with grandbaby, though, so I won't be online a lot. All right, we done?
I think we're done.
Go for it.
Thank you so much for watching. For Gypsy's Kiss the Vlog, I'm Shelley Carney.
And I'm Toby Eunice. We will see you live next week.
Bye-bye.